video text from April.
April's memes are so lit!
You know, I bet you think I wouldn't like cookies coming out of butts, but it turns out I do.
I try my best to stay up to date with what's new in the world of animation, but with many streaming services and networks distributing their content online, we're getting more cartoons than ever before, but it's allowed a lot of great and not so great shows to get lost in the dust. There's a lot of series from the past year that I really wanted to talk about when they were new, but for one reason or another, I didn't have the opportunity to at the time. So without further ado, in no particular order, here are my thoughts or first impressions on 10 cartoons from 2018. As I show you what to watch and what to avoid in this era of animation oversaturation. You know what Star Wars fans have an irrational hatred for? The sequel trilogy. You know what else they have an irrational hatred for? The newest Star Wars animated series. I don't know who at Disney or Lucasfilm thought that fans would enjoy a new animated series set before the events of the sequel trilogy, but Star Wars Resistance is here, and boy do fans already have an irrational hatred for it. I'll admit that going off of visuals alone, it isn't too great. We've gone from the nearly theatrical level designs and animation of the Clone Wars to an art style that almost looks like it lacks proper textures and shading. While I will admit that the character designs are at least eye-catching and rather expressive, visually it just looks like a show meant to entertain kids rather than a full-fledged new part of the Star Wars universe. I will give it credit for at least having an interesting premise and setting, as Resistance follows a newly enlisted rebel spy trying to stop the First Order from taking over a remote sky racing hub called the Colossus. Instead of following a ragtag group of characters as they traverse unique planets across the galaxy, we're stuck on one remote location. But this gives the series a chance to develop some of the supporting characters, and give layers to cool aliens and robots that might have just appeared for a couple of seconds in another Star Wars product. So this unique concept is a good start, but oh no, Disney, what are you doing? Don't unleash your big book of Star Wars cliches onto the cast and stories. Aw man, now you're holding the creativity of the series back by making it limited to the tropes of the franchise that we've seen time and time again. Aw man, now the tone is pretty lighthearted, the adventures are inconsequential, and the protagonist Kaz falls into the completely original archetype of being a spunky wannabe pilot getting way in over his head in a rebellion. I'm not really into Star Wars cartoons, but I can tell that this one is written to a similar formula that both Rebels and Clone Wars followed, so your mileage will vary when it comes to Resistance. But I think it's best summed up by the display that it had at New York Comic Con this year. They had this great replica of the Fireball ship from the show. You could go up to it and take pictures inside of it, but instead of having a cockpit to sit in, they just had a gaming chair. Look, I have nothing against Disney and how they've been treating Star Wars. Like, honestly, giving the franchise back to George Lucas is probably never going to be a good idea, and all things considered, the series isn't that bad. But I think they're being held back from going the extra mile, and all they have to show for it is a gaming chair. So if you watched Craig of the Creek earlier this year and was underwhelmed by the first dozen episodes or so, I don't blame you. I was quite optimistic about this being a fun suburban adventure show, somewhere between Ed, Edd and Eddy and Kids Next Door. But upon first impression, I'll admit that it was kind of bland and predictable, with its simplistic characters and low stakes. Its heart was in the right place, but for a while it seemed like it was trying to figure itself out. I skipped around parts of the first season, and it wasn't until the episode Doorway to Helen where I really had felt satisfied with what I saw. It did a great job focusing on a simple problem through a kid's perspective, occasionally staggering the lines of fantasy and reality. I'd recommend it if you want to give the show a shot, because it's what enticed me to want to watch more. And I'm glad I did, because Craig of the Creek is a really cute show with creative stories and a memorable supporting cast. It's like if the Beach City Townie stuff on Steven Universe was as charming as the rest of the series. If you want to check out any of the earlier episodes, I just advise that you look up its description first, and if you can figure out what's going to happen from just reading that, give it a hard pass. Hopefully the show will become even more reliable over time. But for now, Craig of the Creek fits in nicely with We Bare Bears as a Cartoon Network show you can just have a nice time chilling out with. Also, the theme song is kinda dumb, but it won't leave my head no matter what I do! When you're trying to follow up two of the greatest cartoons of all time, the result is probably going to be disappointing, and Disenchantment, the new adult Netflix series from animation legend Matt Groening and his team, kind of ignores any and all expectations audiences will have and does whatever it wants. Of course, being a longtime Simpsons and Futurama fan, I was disappointed, but I didn't find it to be completely worthless. Lampooning fantasy and fairy tales has become so played out ever since 15 years ago when Shrek found success in it. It's become overdone to the point where this show's attempts to subvert tropes like one of a rebellious princess choosing her own destiny seem more unoriginal than the ideas that they're based off of. Everything with the main characters and their dynamics is directly lifted and shuffled around from Futurama, including an insufferable will they won't they romantic arc that works off of very little natural character chemistry. Disenchantment also takes advantage of the benefits that the Netflix format allows very poorly. Episodes feel like they have an extra act tacked onto them and include excess jokes and non sequiturs that probably would have been cut before the final draft on another show. They also try their hand at a story arc, and it's rather interesting once it gets going around episode 8. But prior to that, most episodes have little to do with setting things up, there's no indicator of what elements I should take seriously or treat like a joke, and the season finale is simply a tease that feels less like a hook and more like a writing cop-out. They even messed up simple things like character backstory and introductions. Lucy's backstory as Bean's personal demon sent by a secret society is slowly forgotten about, and Greenbart's character goes through a poorly communicated 180 right after he gets out of his comfort zone in episode 1. Oddly enough, Disenchantment is probably the best in the smallest aspects, the focus on being good instead of just different. The voice cast is really stellar, the art direction and colors really capture a muddy medieval look, the 2D and 3D animation are smooth and mixed well with one another, there's a lot of memorable side characters, and the episodes that try to go with simpler plots with slight fairy tale spins instead of messy character arcs are probably my favorite. At its best, the show is never really doing anything new, and feels in most ways that it attempts to be different from your average animated adult comedy. As of now, Disenchantment feels like a show that's trying not to be something that is the only thing its creators really know, and it needs to focus on developing what it's best at. Also in the future, it just needs to bring back Matt Berry's Prince Merkimer character. This guy's voice is just perfect.
I've never heard a song so sweet and delicate.
I must have sex with its origin.
I've only dabbled in the Ninja Turtles franchise, so it kind of amazes me how consistently successful each of its cartoons have been. With all three having runs spanning well over 100 episodes, it gives the newest animated incarnation of the Heroes in a Half show a lot to live up to. Nickelodeon's Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kind of understands that it's coming only 10 months after the end of the previous series, so it tries to make everything different, but only for the sake of being different. The Turtles have been swapped out of their classic roles and weapons, and there's less of a focus on telling grand and sometimes serious stories in favor of more goofy comedy and high-energy action. The likes of Krang and the Shredder are almost nowhere to be found, and instead we see our heroes explore the mutant underbelly of New York as they find their footing in their ninja training. Rise of the Turtles shines in its action and overall visual style. Not only do I appreciate the attempts to give each member of the team distinct traits in their species and body shapes, but the show goes bananas with the dynamic angles and swift movements that are all illuminated through stunning background and color work. No other cartoon on cable right now is this ambitious with its visuals, but it comes at the cost of the series being more style over substance. Episodes frequently drag. They rely on extended fight scenes that don't always seem to completely fill 11 minutes. The world that they built is very intriguing and super unique for this franchise, but the rules of how society views mutants aren't entirely clear, considering that they seem to be everywhere in the city. While I do like the approach taken to creating new villains, it doesn't create compelling characters that I can really take seriously. Same goes with the Turtles themselves. They somehow managed to make these characters with clear defining traits a little too similar, especially with Michelangelo and Leonardo. Leo isn't the leader anymore and everyone is a party dude. So these two kind of end up being interchangeable as the slightly annoying one on the team. I wouldn't say that these are terrible interpretations of the characters, but they don't really feel like the Ninja Turtles. It varies with the other characters they take a swing at. Like, I love how energetic and spunky April is, but Splinter is just a lazy jerk that takes the negative traits of the wise old master trope too far. Also, his design is super lame. I think that the show would be better off if it focused more on defining its characters rather than just goofball action, because otherwise it's just fine. If you aren't into the pacing and randomness of today's cartoons, you probably won't dig this, but if you come in with an open mind, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is a fun time. Time to talk about Netflix's hot new cartoon based off of a popular children's book series. I'm of course talking about the epic tales of Captain Underpants. I'm not joking when I say that Captain Underpants was one of my favorite books to read back in elementary school. It may just seem like an excuse for constant toilet humor, and while it definitely is that, it also had super inventive stories, highly clever fourth wall breaking humor, and fight scenes that were brought to life with the technology of Fliporama. Considering the use of animation within the books, it surprises me that it took nearly 20 years for the Waistband Warrior to get his own animated series. While I really enjoyed the movie and thought that it put a fine spin on the books, this sticks far more closely to the source material.
Chapter 1, The Masterpiece. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. This is the night that George and Harold created
Captain Underpants and the Blistering Blasts of the Booming Butt-pocalypse by George Beard and Harold Hutchins.
Each episode is practically a whole new Captain Underpants adventure, with the stories even being divided into chapters and feature all of the recurring gags found in the epic novels. The series was spearheaded by Peter Hastings, who was known for being one of the main writers for Animaniacs, and that very specific style of comedy works with this franchise, though it's all highly formulaic.
Everyone has lost their memory. Like in that movie, everyone's lost their memory.
In a world where everyone's lost their memory.
What?
The fast-paced and in-your-face comedy only takes the show so far before the simplistic characters and conflicts begin to become a bit tiring. The characters from the books are just as enjoyable as they've always been, though George and Harold are basically the same character here, and I don't really mind the new additions. Some of them are a bit one-note, but others like the rival Jessica and the school's janitor, voiced by Clancy Brown, are some of the highlights of the show. However, I think that a lot of episodes lack an extra conflict to really keep me interested. I already know that one of the teachers or students is going to turn into a monster that the boys are going to have to deal with, so why is it that only in a few episodes is there something new happening with the characters or plot? However, there's enough great details and tongue-in-cheek aspects to the series to clog a toilet. I love the use of mixed media like puppets and stop-motion clay models, as well as how the Fliporama sequences are done in a different style every single time it pops up. They even went the extra mile with some recurring gags, like designing a slightly different version of the Captain's cape for nearly every episode to reflect his hasty transformations. The 2D animation is quite good too, making these simple illustrations of Dave Pilkey very bouncy and fun. There is a very weird design tweak that happens a couple episodes into the show, where the blush effect on George and Harold's cheeks is removed. It was a detail that was bugging me from the start, so I don't really mind the change. Despite the flaws in its structure, the humor really lives up to a show with the name Captain Underpants in its title. I'm sure that you'll have at least a little bit of fun with it if my name isn't Ziggy Gerbilheiny, which according to Professor Poopy Pants' name change-o chart, it basically is.
Crime in San Francisco at an all-time low, according to a new study released today by the Department of New Studies. Thank you, Big Hero 6. Since there's nothing else going on, today we begin a 12-part series on foods I don't care for. Part 1. Yams.
Continuing the most recent trend of Disney adapting their animated films into full series is Big Hero 6 the series. It expands upon the universe of the 2014 film in all the ways that I found it to be lacking. By giving more attention to the 4 supporting characters on the team, introducing new locations and characters, and having a really great supervillain, whose identity actually remains a mystery for more than a minute. They do so much with very minor parts of the film, like turning Stanley's brief cameo into a supporting character. The motion-tweened animation kind of fluctuates between being very solid, if a little automated, to completely animated by robots in a few shots. But the action is quite varied and well constructed, and the slightly angular art style they went with reminds me a bit of Disney's older action shows, like American Dragon Jake Long and Kim Possible, and that comparison holds a lot of water considering that this series shares creators with the latter. Kim Possible in particular is known for its wacky and diverse villains, a trait that the Big Hero 6 show shares. However, for me, this creates a bit of a tonal clash, as the team goes up against silly threats like a burger mascot and a cranky internet star, but then you're reminded that, oh yeah, that one character from the movie is dead, and all of a sudden it feels like two tones are suddenly fighting for the spotlight. The series does understand the core of what made the film work, and it's great that all but a few people from the original voice cast have returned to reprise their roles, but sometimes it's a bit hard for me to get invested into this one when it can't decide whether or not it wants to go all the way silly or serious. But if you want a show that feels like a classic early to mid-2000s team action show, Big Hero 6 the series is a solid choice, especially if you already enjoyed the movie.
Back to foods I don't care for. Part 2. Black jelly beans.
Total Dramarama is a bad show with a bad name. I never really watched much of the original Total Drama, but that doesn't really matter because outside of the art style and characters, this spin-off is completely its own thing. Instead of doing a parody of reality competition shows, it's a pure comedy, with standalone 11-minute episodes that takes characters from every iteration of Total Drama and pulls a Muppet Babies with them. It ages the cast down, throws them into preschool, and we just watch them hang out with little to no compelling story. Taking a complete detour from making basically the same show again doesn't seem like the worst idea, but the creators have taken this opportunity to simplify the focus and dumb down the humor. Instead of trying to develop characters, everyone has a simple and sometimes interchangeable character trait, and there's not much of an attempt to build a believable world. It's never explained why Chef is suddenly running a daycare, or why Jude from 16 is here, or why there's still a confession cam at a preschool, or why other characters from the franchise that appear as cameos aren't also toddlers. The show would rather spend time on simple plots and non-sequitur humor that all have a very low-effort feeling to them. I'm not surprised that ratings-wise, this is doing well, considering that it's got the same pandering style of humor as Teen Titans Go. It'll probably run for another season or two before Cartoon Network gives up on it, but I've already given up on it being more than just an excuse to continue a franchise that should have died 6 years ago, just like this rat from the show that got bored.
It's a miracle, kids! We're saved!
Hilda is my favorite animated series I've seen on Netflix thus far. It chronicles the escapades of a young blue-haired girl in a world filled with strange, mystical creatures, as she's forced to move out of the woods with her mother and live in the city of Trollberg. There, Hilda must learn to adapt to city life by going to school, making new friends, and helping out anyone or anything that she can. The premise is simple, even rather cliché, but the series brings such a neat world to life. There's a lot of unique rules that make simple concepts like the weather a little more interesting, and a human element is brought to everything from lovelorn giants to highly organized elves. The character of Hilda isn't afraid to confront any idea that might seem dangerous at first, and her outlook on life brings a very uplifting and daring tone to her adventures. It makes you feel good whenever you watch an episode, and I think that's what's made Hilda so appealing to so many people. The show also looks fabulous, but that's to be expected for anything Mercury Animation is behind, as it meets the same quality standard as their other work on the early episodes of Wander Over Yonder and Star Versus. The color palettes are probably my favorite thing here, as they capture the mood or the tone or the time of day with a perfect mixture of hues, particularly at night. I guess if there's one thing that I rather dislike, it's the forced conflict between the characters that's used to help strengthen their relationship over the last few episodes. It's kicked off with a character turn that seems like a big lapse in logic, and they didn't even do much with the subplot before they resolved it. Though because it didn't dominate the last stretch of the season, it wasn't something that bothered me too much. You could also argue that in general, Hilda kinda plays things safe and does little new that other recent cartoons haven't already done. But it's not trying to be inventive, it's just trying to be entertaining and positive, and in that way, Hilda succeeds. Please go watch it. It is incredibly rare that we get an animated series aimed at adults that is not a sitcom or frequently uses raunchy or gross-out humor. We've gotten one or the other before, but one of the first shows in TBS's new animation lineup, Final Space, breaks that trend and breaks it hard. Disenchantment kind of did too, but this show really stands apart from many of the adult animated programs of the past, and I also didn't have to force myself to finish it. It's a science fiction comedy about ex-con Gary Space, who's flung into an intergalactic conspiracy when he befriends a small green alien who he dubs Mooncake, a creature who, in the wrong hands, may be the key to unlocking the mysterious realm of Final Space. I came into this series nearly blind, only knowing that it was created by YouTuber Olin Rogers, whose content I'd never seen. This is an adaptation of an old pilot he released on his channel, but it's become far more than the simple story that the pilot originally presented. You can feel that there's a grand vision behind the whole show, as it's very tightly written and paced. There's no episode that I would classify as filler, but there's enough downtime surrounding the adventures to introduce the decently sized cast of characters and watch as they grow. The story has a great scope to it, as it flings our protagonists across the galaxy and beyond, which means that we get to see a solar system of unique environments and planets, both natural and technological, but all deliciously sci-fi. The look of the show kind of combines the buttery smooth computer animated character acting of Hilda, this time done by the company Shadow Machine of BoJack Horseman fame, with the breathtaking backgrounds of Rise of the TMNT. The art captures the coldness and isolation of space beautifully, especially in the interconnected cold opens of each episode. Everything from the score to the voice acting just makes Final Space an incredible show with a lot of heart put into it. The only slight drawback I can think of are characters like Gary and Tribor, which are played by Olin Rogers himself. He really enjoys doing long and silly jokes that clash with the normally serious tone.
Oh, he's leaving! Whoa, he's like an angel! Oh my god!
I'm gonna kill you!
It's stabbing my eyes!
Gary gets some much needed and heartfelt development in the second half of the season, but he doesn't grow more serious, while everything around him does. Gary is far from a deal breaker for the show, and his gags can even be rather enjoyable at the right times.
Who's that?
That's the amazing mustache, Gary.
Gary, you're never gonna be able to grow one of these. A thick, rich, luscious mustache.
But this is something I hope will be improved upon in Season 2. Oh, the creator realizes this and is actually taking in criticism with an open mind? That's actually really admirable for someone in the entertainment industry. It makes me even more excited to see what the future holds for Final Space. I never expected to say this, but Mega Man Fully Charged is actually kind of good. It very rarely passes the threshold of being something truly great, but considering the rough production history and very mixed first reaction it got out of me, this was the biggest surprise I had all year. This reboot might look like a watered-down version of the Blue Bomber that takes the character in a childish new direction, but it constantly plays tribute and plays around with the tropes of classic Mega Man. For instance, Mega Man can copy the abilities of other Robot Masters, but his personality is affected when he uses them, adding a good sense of tension to battles and allowing tactics from the games, like swapping different weapons with different Robot Masters, to become a part of the show. Episodes are also littered with Easter eggs that call back to music from the NES-era games, and paintings that appear in the background of one episode that takes place at a museum, which reference games from spin-off series, and even an internet meme from the Ruby Spears Mega Man cartoon.
Aren't they cute? What's with Rush? He must have a screw loose.
Gutsman! I'm really glad that this show honors Gutsman's beautiful ass. The themes of the coexistence between man and technology are also touched on, and there's hints here and there that the conflicts Mega Man is faced with are only a part of a bigger picture, one wrapped up in a history of war and prejudice towards machines.
Despite my reliance on this tool, I am human, and therefore superior. We built you. Equality is a lie.
That's not nice.
Unfortunately, the formulaic nature of each episode keeps the overarching story of the series moving at a snail's pace, and this is where some of my biggest complaints lie. Each episode has to have a positive message shoehorned in and include an annoying 15-second transformation sequence that is always exactly the same. The character redesigns range from the perfect dad bod to this thing that's supposed to be Airman, but overall there isn't anything too special about the way the visuals and environments factor into the action. I'd say that there's no reason that this series couldn't be in 2D, but then I remembered the concept art from 2 years ago, and yeah, that decision really makes sense. At least it isn't all in the faux pixel art style that looks like an early video game flash animation that includes sprites from different styles jumbled together. It's mainly used to show flashbacks, or when the animators don't have enough time to model something for just one scene, but it's been used less and less frequently as the series has gone on. I just hope that Fully Charged is able to continue past its first season, because it deserves so much more than what Cartoon Network has put in to advertise it, which is nothing. I never thought that I would be able to say that a character like Mega Mini would actually be an entertaining sidekick, but this show proved me so wrong, and I recommend you check this out if you have any interest in Mega Man. It may not be your cup of tea, but I still think that you should give it a charge shot. I know that there are some shows that I didn't get the chance to cover in this video, and among those is She-Ra and the Princesses of Power on Netflix, so I'm just gonna go quickly cover it now. Bo has no belly button, 8 out of 10.